As a fifth result of the abandonment of gold, it became possible to rearm without the resulting unbalancing of the budget, leading to financial jeopardy as under a gold standard. Little advantage was taken of this because pacifism on the left and appeasement on the right were regarded as substitutes for arms. Because of the deflationary policy which accompanied the abandonment of gold in Great Britain, recovery from depression did not result except to a very slight degree. Neither prices nor employment rose until 1933, and from that year on the improvement was slow. The depreciation of sterling did result in an improvement in the foreign trade balance, exports rising very slightly and imports falling 12% in 1932 in comparison with 1931. This led to a revival of confidence in sterling and a simultaneous decline in confidence in the gold standard currencies. Foreign funds began to flow to London. The flow of capital into Britain early in 1932 resulted in an appreciation of sterling in respect to the gold currencies. This was unwelcome to the British government since it would destroy her newly acquired trade advantage. The pound sterling appreciated in respect to the dollar from 3.27 on December 1st, 1931 to 3.80 on March 31, 1932. To control this, the government in May 1932 set up the exchange equalization account with capital of £175 sterling. No, £175 million sterling. This fund was to be used to stabilize the exchange rates by buying and selling foreign exchange against the trend of the market. In this way, the old automatic regulation by the market of the internal credit structure through the international flow of funds was broken. Control of the credit structure was left to the Bank of England, while control of the exchanges went to the Exchange Equalization Fund. This made it possible for Britain to adopt a policy of easy and plentiful credit within the country without being deterred by a flight of capital from the country. Since the Exchange Equalization Fund was not a system of exchange control but merely a government management of the regular exchange market, it was not in a position to handle any very considerable emigration of capital. The easy credit policies of Britain, designed to encourage business activity, had thus to be combined with deflationary prices, designed to prevent any powerful flight of capital. The bank rate was dropped to 2% by July 1932, and an embargo was placed on new foreign capital issues to keep this easy money at home. The chief exceptions of this embargo arose from loans to be used in the general policy of binding the sterling bloc to Britain, and the proceeds of these had to be used in Britain. On this basis, although sterling fell to 3.14 by the end of November 1932, a mild economic revival was built up. Cheap credit permitted a shift of economic activity from the old lines like coal, steel, textiles, to new lines like chemicals, motors, electrical products. The tariff permitted a rapid growth of cartels and monopolies, whose process of creation provided at least a temporary revival of economic activity. The continued low food prices permitted the income from this increase in activity to be diverted to necessities of a different kind, especially dwelling construction. The budget was balanced, and early in 1934 showed a surplus of £30 million sterling. The improvement in Britain was not shared by the countries still on gold. As a result of the competition of depreciated sterling, they found their balances of trade pushed toward the unfavorable side, and their deflation in prices increased. Tariffs had to be raised, quotas and exchange controls set up. The United States could hardly do the first of these. Her tariff of 1930 was already the highest in history, and rejected the others in principle. The crisis in the United States, 1933. As a result of the British crisis, the gold countries of Europe sought to modify their financial basis from the gold exchange standard to the gold bullion standard. When Britain abandoned gold in September 1931, France was caught with over £60 million in sterling exchange. This was equal to about 30% of her foreign exchange holdings, 7,775 million francs out of 25,194 million francs. The loss exceeded the total capital and surplus of the Bank of France. To avoid any similar experience in the future, France began to transfer her holdings of exchange into gold, much of it called from the United States. As confidence in the pound rose, that in the dollar fell. It became necessary to raise the New York discount rate from 1.5% to 3.5%, October 1932, and to engage in extensive open market buying of securities to counteract the deflationary effects of this. However, the gold exports and gold hoarding continued, made worse by the fact that the United States was the only gold standard country with gold coins still circulating. As a result of the decline in confidence and the demand for liquidity, the American banking system began to collapse. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation was set up early in 1932 with $3.5 billion in government money to advance the banks and other large corporations. By the end of the year, it had lent over $1.5 billion. When the details of these loans were published in January 1933, runs on the banks were intensified. A bank holiday was declared in Nevada in October of 1932, in Iowa in January 1933, in 6 states during February, and in 16 states in the first 3 days of March. From February 1st to March 4th, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York lost $756 million in gold. It called in $709 million from the other Federal Reserve banks, which were also subject to runs. The banks of the whole United States were closed by executive order on March 4th to be reopened again after March 12th if their condition was satisfactory. Export of gold was subjected to license, convertibility of notes into gold was ended, and private holding of gold was made illegal. These orders, completed on April 20th, 1933, took the United States off the gold standard. This was done in order that the government could pursue a policy of price inflation in its domestic program. It was not made necessary by the American international financial position, as this continued very favorable. This was quite different from the situation in Britain in 1931. London had left gold unwillingly and had followed an orthodox financial program afterward. Washington left gold in 1933 voluntarily in order to follow an unorthodox financial program of inflation. As a result of the abandonment of the gold standard by the United States, the central exchange triangle between London, Paris, and New York was further disrupted. All three exchange rates were able to fluctuate, although the exchange equalization account kept two of them relatively steady. To the worldwide problem of economic distress was now added the problem of exchange stabilization. A dispute ensued among Britain, France, and the United States over which of these two problems should be given priority. France insisted that no economic recovery was possible until exchanges were stabilized. It surely was true that as long as the franc remained on gold at the same valuation, France would suffer from the depreciation of the pound and the dollar. The United States insisted that economic recovery must have priority over stabilization, since the latter would hamper the process of price reflation, which the administration considered essential to recovery. Britain, which had supported the priority of recovery over stabilization as long as the pound was the only one of the three currencies which was depreciated, insisted on the importance of stabilization as soon as the advantages of depreciation began to be shared by the dollar. This depreciation of both the dollar and the pound put great strain on the franc. To keep France from being forced off the gold standard, Britain, on April 28, 1933, lent her £30 million sterling to be repaid out of the sterling exchange with France had been caught in September 1931. Until the middle of 1933, the exchange equalization account was used by Britain to prevent any appreciation by the pound. This was countered in the United States by the inflationary Thomas Amendment to the Agricultural Adjustment Act, May 12, 1933. This amendment gave the President the power to devaluate the dollar up to 50%, to issue up to $3 billion in fiat money, and to engage on an extensive program of public spending. The World Economic Conference, 1933. This dispute over the priority of stabilization or recovery reached its peak in the World Monetary and Economic Conference held in London from June 12 to July 27, 1933. A preparatory commission of experts drew up a series of preliminary agreements for countries on gold or off, with exchange controls or without, But no agreement could be obtained at the conference itself. Britain and France tried to get the dollar to join them in a temporary de facto stabilization in preparation for a real agreement. The franc and pound had already been pegged to each other at 84 francs per pound.